Hello and welcome back to the Vincast for 2014. It's been quite a while since last episode. Obviously been on a bit of a hiatus over that Christmas New Year period down here in Australia. Obviously it's summer, and so everyone's been enjoying their summer. They get a bit of a break and people go away and celebrating various things, obviously eating lots of food, drinking lots of wine. So I haven't actually been able to sit down with anyone over that period. So it's really good to be back. 2014, here we go. Lots of exciting things coming up, which obviously I'll be covering in subsequent episodes. But, this is episode 15 of the Vincast. I think we've had some really fun episodes, lots of interesting guests. Really wanting people to sort of interact a little bit more if possible. Obviously we're on Twitter. I'm on Twitter myself. You can hit me up on the blog. Looking for some reviews on iTunes where obviously you can download. Really wanting to get people interested in discussing some of the topics and some of the people that come up on the show. And so really, and also the other thing is I'd really love for people to sort of help promote. We want to get more and more people interested in discussing wine and wine culture, wine people. So anything you can do to help out the Vincast, reach more of an audience, that would be really, really appreciated. So I really do appreciate everyone who listens to it and enjoys it and who's already commented so far. The feedback has been fantastic, and let's really build the show if we can. So thank you again, guys, for listening to the show, and it's good to be back. For our first episode of 2014, I've actually invited someone who is actually part of a really fantastic initiative we have here in Australia, which is the Australian First Families of Wine. Basically, as many of you would know, both in Australia and overseas, the Australian wine industry is quite large, and I think Australia is the fourth or fifth largest exporter of wine. But most of the wine you would see does come from a small number actually, of large producing companies who cover quite a range of different regions, particularly in the southeastern part of Australia. And they're corporate, they're companies who are, in some cases, Australian owned, in some cases they're sort of internationally, but they're all publicly floated. But the Australian First Families, it represents some of the more historic and also some of the larger family-owned wine-producing companies. And so my guest is actually one of the more recent generations. The first families, I believe, have to represent at least two or three generations of family-owned wineries. So my guest is from Burch Family Wineries, which, of course, is behind the iconic Western Australian wine brand of Howard Park. So, Richard, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
So, Richard, something that I generally like to ask people is, what was your first interaction with wine that made you sort of get it and kind of know that you wanted to sort of follow a career path in wine? Obviously, with the family, it's slightly different. It might have been a different kind of interaction. Yeah,
it's hard to pinpoint one specific moment. I guess in a wine family, it's always around and you can't escape it. And I had a crack at escaping it and I didn't go very well.
Oh, really? What sort of did you explore?
Well, when I finished school, the old man was like, "You got to be a winemaker. We need one of them in the family." And I was like, "Oh, Dad, that's pretty heavy. I don't really want to do that, to be honest." But I had a crack at it anyway, and then didn't like it. I didn't want to be in the farm or in the lab making wine. So
did you go and study?
I did study. Yeah, I studied at Curtin University for a couple of years doing
that's in Perth.
In Perth,
right?
Yeah,
okay.
Doing a viticulture and oenology degree. But I stopped after 2 years and didn't finish it. I probably
passionate about it.
Well, just
with pressure, or
it felt like it was something I should have done, and Dad was just forcing me to do it.
Just expectations, sort of thing?
Definitely. Okay. But I'm glad I had a crack at it, and then I pulled out of that, and then ended up working towards. I think I went to Europe for 12 months and just partied for a little while.
An Australian rite of passage.
Exactly, and then ended up going back into marketing and advertising, and I really wanted to have a crack at something that I wanted to do that I was passionate about before caving into the pressures of joining the family business.
Sure. I know it's a very common thing, particularly in Australia, in terms of families who own wineries, where the children are encouraged to sort of go away and maybe work for a different wine company, whether that's sort of in the winemaking or viticulture side, or even in sort of the business side. I even know of some producers over in Europe that sort of sent children, well, not sent, but their children went over and worked in the United States, for example, working for a wine merchant or something like that, to get experience, and then to come back to sort of, so there's this sort of not like, there's no real kind of complacency. I'm not sure if that's the right word for it.
I understand exactly what you're talking about. It just reminded me of a point when we first started doing the AFFW, or being involved in the AFFW program. I remember the Brown brothers, or I guess you call it the Brown girls, because it's all really girls in there.
The Brown daughters.
The Brown daughters. I remember Ross Brown was saying that they had this rule where you couldn't join the family business unless you'd worked in other industries for, I think it was 2 or 3 years.
In other industries? Even.
Other industries. It could be anything, and I can sort of see that. And we've adopted a pretty similar policy at Burch Family Wines as well. And I think it's good because you go out and into the field. Doesn't matter what you do. You learn new skills, you meet new people, and you build new networks. And then you bring those networks and new skills back to the business with a fresh approach.
Do you remember how old you were when you sort of first became aware of wine, like first introduced to it?
I'm going to say at a pretty young age, of probably around 16, 17, even younger than that.
And aware that that was what that the family business was.
Correct.
In wine, that kind of thing.
Well, Dad always brought the business home with him to the dinner table, so I was always hearing the conversations
that's a nice perk.
about how it's evolving, and all the big business decisions we've made as a company at Burch Family Wines have been around the kitchen table, and which is how I've sort of evolved through it, and I've always had a good understanding through that. And I was very fortunate to have a dad who loved talking about business and wine and decisions, and especially being in Western Australia, where it was quite a rapid evolution of wine, and it's only been growing grapes for around 50 years. So
tell us a bit about your dad. I was just reading that he was a lover of surfing, and obviously for those who aren't aware, the Margaret River in particular is one of the best places for surfing in Australia, and that's kind of where you just had that interaction with, particularly with the Margaret River region and wine as well.
Definitely.
So how did that happen?
How did it all fit in? I guess I could describe him as a bit of a rat bag. You probably wouldn't like me saying this, but he was from South Australia originally.
See, unfortunately for those people who might not be as familiar with Australian slang, you're going to have to tell us what you mean by rat bag.
A bit of I was going to use another slang, a scoundrel, a bit of a cheeky individual. A little bit naughty. But he's always had a passion for wine.
A rebel?
A rebel. Definitely a bit of a rebel, I would say that. A terror. So he started a passion for wine at a very young age in South Australia, hanging out with his old man, who was, I think, a tradesman in South Australia. And then the two of them moved to West Australia at quite a young age. I don't know how old they were when they moved over.
Yeah.
And then started a plastic business over there, or a packaging company over there. And on the side, there was always this passion brewing for wine. And eventually when, Jeff's father, Leston, started farming the land in Margaret River, Jeff started to get a real more hands-on approach about how agriculture, and especially growing vines, could be turned into a business, and then evolving from that. And then from a young age, it started as a partnership with the first winemaker of Howard Park Wines, Mr. John Wade, in Denmark. And then from that, it evolved quite quickly. And then I guess Jeff applied his knowledge of growing businesses and manufacturing to a wine business.
Sure.
And watched it evolve from there.
So at the time, there would have been a small handful of wineries, certainly in Margaret River, probably even less down in Great Southern. Howard Park being one of the original wineries, I believe, down particularly in that Denmark area. And him getting involved with that obviously over that period of time that he started to get more and more involved with it, that it would have changed quite significantly, and particularly in terms of Margaret River being for tourism purposes. Is that
exactly
that's part of the Howard Park?
That was definitely one of the moves. Well, to actually come to Margaret River. So we started making wine in Denmark first.
Yep.
In '86. And then that kept going for a while. And then I think in 2000 was the first sort of real commitment to Margaret River, and then becoming a dual region producer, not just in Margaret River, but Great Southern. And that was, like you said, the tourism factor is very large in Margaret River. You've got a great lifestyle down there, plenty of people coming in. I think there's now 120 odd wineries in Margaret River these days, and it's grown a lot. And obviously the lifestyle on the coastline is quite sexy and attractive to a lot of people. So you got to go where the people are, and then by doing that, you've now bedded yourself in two regions, and obviously the two regions are so different from a winemaking point of view or growing fruit point of view. It just naturally grows the business more, because you find you're getting Riesling from the Great Southern, and then Chardonnay and Cabernet from Margaret River.
Okay, and obviously Western Australia is sort of for a long time has been kind of the frontier of wine in Australia, being so isolated from the vast majority of where the wine is being produced in Australia, and Great Southern particularly being so far away from Perth.
Yep.
That must have presented some challenges, and there's not a lot of stuff else down there, but for people who don't know, the Great Southern is a pretty large area right down obviously the bottom of Western Australia, and predominantly it is much more of a cooler climate, particularly than Margaret River. Even though we would say Margaret River is still fairly cool climate with that maritime influence.
Yep.
Great Southern being further south is a lot cooler, and that's why Riesling is such a key variety down there.
That's right. Yeah, Margaret River is definitely a little bit warmer, and you can grow varieties that suit that warmer climate a lot more in Margaret River. Mm-hmm. But people don't realise, the Great Southern is a huge region, and it's about 5 hours southwest from Perth. It's a long drive to quite an isolated, remote area, which is a lot higher above altitude from Margaret River.
Yeah.
So you're getting those cool breezes coming in from the ocean, and it is quite close to the ocean there.
That's the Southern Ocean?
The Southern Ocean, yep.
The coldest ocean?
Is it? I don't know. It's pretty cold down there.
Well, actually, I don't know, because the Pacific Ocean being big is also pretty cold, I think. I don't know. I just know it's cold when you go to the beach here in Victoria.
Yeah, it's even colder down there. It's shark infested as well.
So in terms of, forgive my ignorance, but did your dad actually set up Howard Park, or did he got involved with it after it already existed?
I think it started as a partnership. So the winemaker John Wade, I mentioned before, it was his brand. It was actually his father's name, Howard Wade, who was the motivation for the Howard Park.
Uh-huh.
But and then Jeffrey came on as a partner from that, and then the rest is history. He kind of just kept evolving and kept growing it. I don't particularly know which point John Wade left the business. I can't remember, but he was a big part of that business and set up the foundations for Howard Park in Riesling and Cabernet. And he was actually an incredible winemaker as well. I believe he's still living in the region down there, making chocolates and things like that.
Yeah.
Infused with wine and things like that. But yeah, it's a little interesting story, and it just started as a partnership, and it's evolved from that. And then, yeah, it's for me as a second or third generation, depending on how you look at it. It's been exciting to see a small brand like that making 200 cases of Riesling and Cabernet, to really being into two regions and having such a big credibility around the world. And it's in such a short period of time, less than 30 years. So
yeah,
it's been incredible to see that evolve and be a part of the decision-making process during the whole way.
And so when you sort of started to be aware more, you understood more about the business, was it still just Howard Park, or had they already started sort of evolving into sort of more sub or separate brands?
Well, I think we did shoot off another brand during that process as well. I think it was, I'm terrible with my history here, could it be around the 93 or 92 around then, when we created Madfish Wines, which is a label, a takeoff of a label, a bay down in Denmark called Madfish Bay. But two very different tiered wines enabled you to get an insight to sort of, I don't want to use the word premium wine, but high-end wine, and then sort of more entry-level wine, and seeing the differences between the two. And then you look at a business from that point of view and see how they evolve and into different markets, and then you're looking at markets and things like that. So,
and the decision to sort of establish, I guess Howard Park in two regions, rather than sort of keeping Howard Park as the Great Southern sort of winery and establishing a new winery. Do you know kind of why they decided to sort of do Howard Park across multiple regions?
I think it's tying back into having a key base and a cellar door in Margaret River. And it wasn't like we wanted to be part of two. That just naturally evolved.
Sure.
And being in that region, you could have fruit from that region. So initially it was just a decision to have a different site where we could show off the wines from the Great Southern. But then the farmland around that area was so good for Cabernet and Chardonnay, and that's when Jeff's father Leston started farming. So I guess it naturally evolved being part of two, and we've had little roots in both, and then they both progress at different levels and tempos as the years have gone on, and as at the end of it, you are quite heavily embedded in both regions now, which I think is a great thing because you're part of, they're so different climatically.
Yep.
And then it expands the amount of wines you can show people, and we like doing that. We know we don't want to be limited to just a few products. It's great to show people all different styles of wine, and we're definitely big ambassadors for West Australian wine, which is an up and coming thing. And it's we believe in the region, and we like what we're doing over there, and it's exciting for the future.
WA, obviously, for a number of reasons, logistically, the fact that generally it's still pretty young in terms of wine producing. There isn't really a lot of wine produced. Although there's a reasonable amount, but there aren't any sort of massive wineries down there. Is sort of the wine industry, the community there, are they all fairly close and collaborative? Very
close and collaborative in both regions. I think there's something like 9 wine regions in Western Australia.
Okay.
Arguably the two largest ones would be Great Southern and Margaret River.
Yeah.
And they've each got their own little subcommittees, and the communities are very small, and they do know each other because the vineyards are right next door to each other. You're all playing in the same field. You're going to the same events a lot of the time. So naturally, the communities are small and tight. But you're definitely right, James. At Western Australia, I think I pulled a few stats earlier. I think it only produces 4% of Australia's total wine production.
Sure.
But 25% of that is over $20 odd. So it is.
So we are talking more in that premium kind of category.
It's not the word I would like to use often, but it definitely is that sort of premium wine.
That's a term that gets bandied around a lot.
It is. We try not to use it.
Well, yeah, obviously that's going back to my wine business studies days when they tried to put it into categories and segments and blah blah blah.
Yep.
And at the same time, is there a real sense of sort of isolation and kind of like we're on the edge of the world here? And,
without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
We're out here sort of fighting,
we're fighting the West Australian...
Go west, my son, kind of thing.
Yeah. It actually is, and it's amazing. I've been living in Melbourne for about a year.
Okay.
And I ask a lot of people, have you ever been to Western Australia? They're like, no, it's too far. I don't want to go there. It's like, really?
I don't do well with jet lag, that kind of thing.
It's not that bad. But you can ask any West Australian there, and they're going to say they definitely feel like they're isolated. I think it is the most isolated city in the world. Someone told me that.
Perth?
Yeah, Perth.
Okay.
But
as in it's
from distance from one city to another.
Right, okay.
Is the largest from anywhere in the world, which
sure.
is quite a staggering little stat. I'm not sure if it's right or not, but...
Well, I guess it depends what you determine as a city. Like,
that's true.
Like minimum population, I guess. But you are probably right, But and obviously more recently, that side of Australia has been experiencing quite a boom financially in terms of, particularly in terms of the sort of the mining industry, and so there's been a bit of money coming in. Has there been sort of quite an investment into agriculture and the wine industry in general?
Definitely, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The mining boom in Western Australia has definitely been one of the factors driving the growth of West Australian wine. There's a lot of people with a lot of money looking for hobbies and things to do, and little projects to
there's even there's always recently I think there's been quite a bit of not just in WA but in the wine industry in Australia in general. There's been a bit of international investment as well.
Definitely. Yep.
Particularly stuff coming out of Asia, which is really interesting. And sort of setting up a winery to be a super kind of ultra premium sort of producing, almost maybe in that sort of Bordeaux sort of chateau model, and just sort of saying, we're just going to make, the best wine we can, and just here's all the money you need kind of thing.
Yeah.
It is nice. That's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. Obviously it's good, supports, jobs and stuff like that. But, it's kind of nice to sort of look at a story like, Howard Park and Burch Family and to sort of see how, it could grow from something quite small organically and to sort of early on fight and to establish and to educate, I guess, particularly on regions that, I mean, even within Australia, a lot of people wouldn't have even heard of Great Southern, let alone overseas. So I'm sure that must have been pretty hard. So when did you actually get involved in that sort of marketing and business side?
In a full-time role at Burch Family Wines, I started in 2012.
Really? Okay, so it's been quite recent?
It's been recent. But before that, I've been very involved in a lot of events and marketing things.
Sure.
Just not in a full-time capacity.
Okay. And you have siblings that are involved as well?
I do. I'm the youngest of the family. So I'm 27, and I've got oh my God, this is really bad. I don't actually know my brother's and sister's age.
That's okay. Just tell me the order, and that'll be fine.
So there's Dave, who's older than me, my brother. He works in sales and marketing. He's probably more of a online type role.
Right.
And my sister...
and so where is he based in?
He's based in Perth.
In Perth, okay.
Yep. In the office in Fremantle there. And then my sister works in operations in Margaret River.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay. And they've been involved a little bit longer?
Yeah, I think my sister's about 9 years, and my brother's probably around 7 or so, around that.
Did they? I mean, I'm not sure if you can speak for them, but did they sort of have that similar feeling of kind of the expectation of becoming part of the family business, and particularly, I guess, even when you were sort of maybe in your teens, you might have seen the business expanding and sort of I guess there might have been an expectation there that, oh look, we need everyone involved because the business is growing. So did you know if they kind of had experienced those kind of feelings as well?
I would say so. I know, speaking for Nat and Dave, like Nat had a crack at being a teacher in Margaret River for a few years.
Okay.
But she quickly realised that wasn't for her, and it just wasn't really working. And she made a pretty quick decision to just jump into the business, and she's enjoyed it ever since. Obviously, it's a pretty sharp learning curve down there and baptism of fire, but she's been enjoying it. But she definitely had a crack at doing something else beforehand.
But generally, wine is in the blood.
It is. It really is, especially in a wine family. And this, I'm sure a lot of the families in Australia's first families of wine would feel exactly the same.
Sure.
From the moment you're born, you've got a little bit of wine in the blood anyway. It's built in, and you always. I guess that's what happened with Burch Family Wines, where we only rebranded the company sort of Burch Family Wines a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And before that, it had been just Howard Park Wines.
So what was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I guess the reasoning was we couldn't call the company Howard Park Wines anymore because we had other brands that were being made under that same name. So we had Madfish, which is a very popular brand, been around for 21 years in Australia and around the rest of the world.
Yep.
And then more recently, Marchand and Burch, which is a collaboration between Jeff Burch, Dad, and Pascal Marchand of Burgundy.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about that. How did you actually first come into contact with Pascal?
How did it start happening? I guess that started definitely in Burgundy, in a little house in Montpellier that Dad owned with a number of other people from Australia. And he's been going there for about 15, 20 years. And that just next door was Pascal Marchand, a winemaker from Burgundy. I think he's born in Canada originally, but he's been making wine in Burgundy for a long time.
Okay.
And I think
Quebec.
Yeah, Quebec.
Which is virtually still France.
Yep. But, they just formed a friendship straight away, and eventually it got to a point where their friendship evolved to, you make wine in Australia, you make wine in France, let's do something together.
Okay.
And then Jeff flew Pascal out to the Great Southern in Western Australia and said, all right, let's make a wine. Let's make a French-style wine using Australian fruit. Off you go. Here's a blank check. Go out there and plant it however you want, wherever you like, and do it your certain style. Okay, so I know it's easy to say French-style wine, but what does that mean? French-style, I guess. So it's probably a little bit different from, I guess, a West Australian or a lot of Australian viticulture in that, the canopy management's very different. Okay. The soils are a lot different. For Marchand and Burch wines, they're all biodynamically grown. So you're introducing quite odd practices like planting cow horns of dung in them throughout the row. Vineyard practices and harvesting are based on the lunar calendar. Yep. And you're more or less letting the wines do evolve at a natural rate and not really challenging them, and minimal pesticides and herbicides and things like that.
So how does that differ to the way that the wines would normally be made by Burch Family Wines?
Well, I guess with Howard Park, we would do a lot of harvesting by machine. We would certainly use herbicides and pesticides more so in the earlier years. We would have done that, and I guess would have been more modern. I don't know what the right term to use. It's more traditional, more modern ways of viticulture and winemaking, using things that people perceive to be as bad these days, like sulfur and more chemicals. But
copper sulfate is allowed in biodynamics.
It is. Yep.
It's classified as a natural product.
Yep.
I think you probably would be doing pretty well if you didn't have to use it. But I'm just interested to sort of know the reasoning behind saying come here and make a French.
I probably didn't explain that clear enough.
I guess the reason being that to a certain extent, I guess the sort of the acclaim and the success of the wines is that they're being made in, for lack of a better term, in an Australian way, or at least in a great southern way. I'm just interested to know what the rationale behind sort of saying, look, come down and make a wine different.
Well, Pascal's been making wines in Burgundy for God knows how many years, and we basically said to him, come down and plant and grow fruit how you would do it as if you were in France.
But the thing is, though, that the Burgundy and Denmark, or wherever he planted down in the Great Southern, are not the same place.
No.
We're talking about different things. So
totally different.
What did he actually come in and do it exactly the same way he would do it in Burgundy, or did he kind of get a feel for the place and sort of go, okay, I think using my experience and knowledge of Burgundy, I think this would be the right thing to do in this place? That's
correct.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of certainly the winemaking, I guess that would have been a little bit different in the way that the fruit was being handled, and possibly a little bit more labour intensive, a little bit more hands-on.
Definitely more labour intensive.
And which really can only be done in fairly small batch sort of winemaking, which, obviously this does contribute a little bit in terms of the cost of the wine, but that's why generally the better quality wines are more expensive, because they do cost more to produce. It's not just a question of the fruit is more expensive to grow. It's also, there is a little bit more work done in the vineyard and in the winery that does add a little bit more cost, but you are getting the benefit of smaller, much better controlled, I guess. Sort of wines. And so then the relationship with Burgundy, then
it evolved from a few vintages of, I guess you call it the Australian collection of Marchand and Burch.
Sure.
Where the first vintage of that wine, and it was a few years after they had been established, ready to go for giving off some fruit. The wine got, I think it got 96 or 97 points. The Chardonnay we grew, which was a great indication of quality. And we thought we're onto something here.
Can you tell me who gave them those points?
I think it was James Halliday.
Okay.
Yep.
So Australia's foremost authority on wine quality.
Yep. He's pretty serious in Australia. Sure. So that was a really great sign that we were onto something, and that it worked, and we just got to keep growing it and encouraging it and putting more energy into it. And then I guess in Burgundy, Pascal did the same sort of project over there, where he invited Jeff to Burgundy and walked around. There are a number of vineyards in Burgundy, looking at all the vines, looking at all the fruit. And given his relationship and his network in Burgundy, we were able to get access to some pretty good fruit over there.
So when you say access?
Well, we were able to buy some fruit from some very old vineyards over there. And that became the backbone of various different vineyards, mainly Village, sort of tiered Pinots and Chardonnays, to create the French collection of Marchand and Burch. Okay.
So as Marchand and Burch, as a sort of a sub-brand, I don't like using the term brand, but that now includes Chardonnay, just Chardonnay, or Pinot Noir from Great Southern?
In Australia?
Yeah.
So we've got a Great Southern Pinot from Mount Barker.
Okay.
A Chardonnay from the Prongerups.
Yep.
There's also a Shiraz as well, which is from Franklin River, but also a little bit of the fruits from also Margaret River. and they're the three main wines there.
Okay.
Occasionally we grow another Pinot from a site called Gibraltar Rock, which is very close to Prongerups.
Yeah.
But we only do that when the fruit is really good.
So Pascal sort of consults in terms of the winemaking and stylistically, but there's a winemaker as part of the kind of oversees all the other kind of production of Howard Park, and her name escapes me.
Janice McDonald.
Janice, who has apparently really done fantastic in lifting the profile, particularly of Riesling. And I think she's been championing sort of the off-dry styles as well.
She has.
Yeah.
She has taken our wines, in particular our whites, for me, which is what I've noticed, to a whole new level. They've become a lot more floral and a lot more attractive as well. For our reds, she's made them a lot more approachable, juicy, and luscious from the get-go, which were previously quite tight and austere wines. She has some excellent knowledge in making Chardonnay, which she attained from creating Stella Bella wines, which is also from Margaret River. But she's brought some excellent skills to our winemaking, which is we're very lucky to have her, and it's flowed on into Marchand and Burch as well. So
sure.
When Pascal isn't in town, Janice is definitely in the vineyards, in the winemaking, looking over the vines.
Yeah. So it's very collaborative then.
Correct, yeah.
Fantastic. Tell me how you got involved with Australia's First Families.
Well, Australia's First Families of Wine was an initiative that started, I think, just over 3 years ago. And I think the idea stemmed from Halstead Purbrick from Tabilk Wines, actually. And there was a similar model running in New Zealand called New Zealand's First Families of Wines. And it all came about from a need to really do something to raise the profile of Australian wine around the world, because you've got these big brands out there that are being distributed to international markets, and we didn't necessarily, or collectively, a lot of people in Australia didn't believe that they collectively represented what Australian wine is. I don't want to name any brands, but there are some brands that weren't as nice over there, quite cheap and cheerful, not giving Australia a good reputation.
Well, I would argue that they are largely responsible. I mean, this might not be when they were corporate, but they were responsible for putting Australia on the map to a large extent.
Correct, definitely.
But the wine industry, the global wine industry, has changed quite significantly, and there are now some really exceptional not very expensive wines coming out of South America and South Africa and even California, that kind of thing, which even though they represent good quality, they're not really from anywhere. They don't really taste of anything apart from maybe the variety. And that is now what sort of, I agree, that the vast majority of wine, that particularly is being exported, is representing. And I think that's, as you were saying, with the First Families, that's why they're trying to champion not necessarily just this is Australian wine, but these are Australian wines from somewhere.
Yes, give it a sense of place. And give also Australian wine a bit of personality as well.
And connecting to people.
It's all about connecting to people, and you get these absolute characters in all the First Families.
Sure. Hitting
the market, and they're pretty eccentric creatures entering the market, and it adds a lot of fun to Australian wine as well. Australian wine, the whole wine industry can be pretty serious at times. And I don't think wine should be taken that seriously. And although you can go that serious angle, it's also about having a lot of fun and providing some personality to all the brands and a sense of place. And obviously a big part of Australians' First Family Wines is a family and how that evolves.
Mm-hmm. And what sort of initiatives have you guys been involved with in terms of the First Families, particularly both in Australia and overseas?
Yep. So in Australia, we do this big tasting called Unlocked, which we started in Sydney, and I think last year we rolled that out into Brisbane, which is a huge tasting where both the trade and consumers, where we showcase all the top wines and all the up-and-coming wines for each of the families, and that they're presented by the current generation who are running the show, and also a group which we call the Next Gen, which is the next of kin of each of those families. That's been a useful little vehicle to roll out in each city. Domestically, we also do a couple of events just for the Next Gen where we take a very relaxed approach to winemaking and presenting wines and showing wines to people, where it's just the next of all the Next Geners, at a venue, whole bunch of consumers, much casual approach to wine and not so serious, which is quite fun.
Is there quite a culture of kind of experimentation and trying new things going on within the whole group?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. All the current, I'll refer to them as the current generation, which is people that are running the CEOs and the managers of the wineries.
Yeah.
They have a certain style. It's usually very traditional and old school. And it's interesting to see how that infuses with the next generation.
It's amazing that we're saying sort of, 80s and 90s is traditional and old school.
It's terrible,
So
isn't
it kind of shows you how fast the Australian wine industry and wine tastes in general have evolved.
Yes, correct.
And so what sort of experimentation are you guys doing over in the West?
In the West, probably some experimentation we're doing over there would be through sparkling.
Okay.
Which is something quite new coming out of Western Australia.
Sure.
We've found the Great Southern climate is excellent for growing Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which has become the basis of our method traditional champagne or sparklings, which we've been creating for a while now. So that's something quite new. Riesling has always been a big thing, a big part of Great Southern, but I guess compared to the rest of Australia, we've still got a long way to go in teaching people that we can make excellent Riesling down there.
Yeah, but at the same time, the Riesling market is not exactly kind of kicking any goals. I would agree that sparkling wine consumption continues to grow in Australia. Obviously now Australia, I think, is 7th largest champagne market in the world, which is amazing considering our population. But Riesling, I'm interested because I don't disagree that there is some exceptional quality in terms of Riesling, but just people, even with initiatives like Summer of Riesling, there sort of doesn't seem to be enough kind of energy around Riesling as a variety. I could be wrong. It could I could be very wrong.
It's that variety that we often joke about it in the industry, that it's the variety that everyone in the industry drinks.
Exactly.
But I don't know why that's the case, because it's affordable more so than things like Chardonnay, which can be a little bit more expensive for a complex wine. It's clean and easy to drink, and it can go many different ways, and you can put it away in the cellar for a while. You can drink it straight away. For me, it has a lot of versatility and a lot of flexibility for consumers, and that's quite attractive, I think.
But do you see the sort of the experimentation and trialling that Janice is doing, for example, in sort of really putting out the message about sort of off-dry styles and maybe even sweeter styles, really a valuable tool to sort of like lift the profile of Riesling?
I think the more time you bang the drum about it, that's the way you're going to get your message across.
Okay.
But I guess, in the end of the day, for us, Riesling's one of a few varieties we grow, so you can only bang it so hard and for so long.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
have you sort of seen there been much of a downturn in terms of consumption of Cabernet, for example?
Maybe a little bit. I guess in terms of in Western Australia, Cabernet has always been probably one of the top varieties grown there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every producer's got a Cabernet in Margaret River. And even for us, Howard Park, our top Cabernet is actually from the Great Southern. A lot of people don't realise. But and then Chardonnay is obviously very popular. But yeah, Cabernet, it comes in waves, but it'll always have a home, I think. And given the quality of Cabernet coming out there, and it's only getting better as the vines get older, I think it will be pretty steady.
In terms of export markets, roughly how much do you export of the production?
I am terrible at answering these questions. I don't have a very clear idea, but we export to around 25, 30 different countries, some obviously very small quantities in certain parts of Asia. What are the
big markets?
The big markets would definitely be Asia. China can't be ignored. It's a big, ugly, unchained bulldog at the moment. You just got to keep an eye on it and see what it's doing. The US is almost like a clean slate, how it's been approached over there. People are now starting to look at Australian wine a lot more over in the US. The UK has always been a big market. It's obviously been through its challenges in the last 10 years, but it's still slowly starting to come around, which is exciting. They're probably the top three that I'd think of off the top of my head.
And of those, where do you sort of see the most potential in terms of educating consumers about better quality Australian wines, different wine regions from Australia, that kind of thing?
Yep. I think probably the most receptive audience in each of those markets would be Asia. they have a pretty keen thirst for knowledge.
Sure.
And more so Australian wine. They're certainly looking at it and not only buying large vineyards all around Australia, but trying all sorts of wine and are very interested in what we are doing here in Australia.
Sure.
And like you touched on before, Australian viticulture and winemaking is moving at a very fast pace.
Yeah.
And a lot of producers are quite reactive to trends in the market.
I actually, I think that there's going to be more and more influence in Asia in terms of Australian wine consumption trends and tastes here. They're going to. I actually think they're going to look less to the North America and Europe in terms of indications about trends and tastes, and they're going to look more and more to Australia. And so, particularly in terms of our food and wine culture that we tend to have, obviously predominantly in the larger capital cities, and that's going to be a big influence in Asia. And so I think in that respect, it's important to sort of get into the Asian markets with sort of those gatekeepers, I guess, as influential sommeliers and wine communicators and educators, and sort of really be championing this sort of stuff that we are doing here in Australia.
Yep. Well, that's what we did with Australia's first families of wine. I think late last year, around September, all the first families went to China, and did a full program in Shanghai, Beijing, and Hong Kong.
Wow. Okay.
Which is a huge exercise. And
so, what sort of program? What did that involve?
Well, it's a similar program that we have rolled out in the UK before. We've done Canada and Ireland in the early years. Each year, Australia's first families wine will pick a country and focus on that country to champion Australian wine within that country through sommelier programs, trade tastings, consumer events.
Let's go back.
Sorry.
Sommelier programs, what does that involve?
Get a whole bunch of sommeliers into a room and taste some wines with them and teach them about the wines.
So in a structured tasting?
Correct, a structured tasting.
Okay. And sorry, then trade...
So trade tastings were, so I guess you're looking at your food and beverage managers of hotels and bars and restaurants and places like that.
Yep.
Much the same as the sommelier tasting, doing a structured tasting with them and giving them bite-sized chunks of information which they can digest and then use at their particular venues that they're associated with. Teaching them little things about terroir of Australia as well and differences in the region. That's very important. Obviously, in Australia's first families of wine, we're in a lot of the key regions of Australia. So that's a big part of these tastings, and they go on for a long time. So it's important to break down that information to dissectable little bites of information.
And you're finding that the feedback is generally positive? Are people sort of able to understand and kind of process that information?
Yes.
Because I think, in my humble opinion, one of the problems that some wine producing countries have had in the past in communicating with Asia is that there's a certain level of assumed knowledge, which historically has always been the case, but in Asia they have no experience at all, and so there's no reference point, and so it's not just a question of a language barrier, but it's also a cultural barrier and
hugely, and
a frame of reference. Obviously, part of the reason being that a lot of people historically, or maybe until recently, in Asia hadn't really left the continent, let alone the country, let alone the continent. So to try and kind of explain what Australia is, for example, is, and sort of see this massive country, and then to sort of try and break it down into small parts and introduce them to concepts and, you know, different soil types and that kind of thing.
Yep.
Is that something that they're able to digest? Or is that really just going to take time and time and time?
I think it's definitely something that has to evolve over time, and you've got to be, you know, not just do one big show and then that's it for that market, then they get it. It's got to be something that's constantly being done over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, basic things like really good maps as well, you know, it's such a simple tool, and just making it very clear that this variety's grown here and this variety's grown here.
And why.
And giving them the reasons why, and bite-sized information that they can dissect. So I think over a period of time, it will evolve as long as we keep committing resources to the market and growing that market, because it is worthwhile doing. But it's definitely not a one-shot type thing and nail it on the head in one go.
But generally, there aren't any issues in terms of, yes, we know Australia and we know Australia makes wine. It's really just sort of about saying, okay, we make great wine and we have lots of different places and we can make some wines that maybe you didn't realise we could make, particularly in terms of cool climate wines.
Yep.
Obviously, the general association of Australia is with hot beaches or the outback, and so it's like cool climate. Psh, not in Australia, mate. I think that's why in the past it's been easy to promote cool climate New Zealand wines because
it's all cool climate.
Yeah, exactly. They've got these big mountains that you see in the Lord of the Rings movies and goes, oh yeah, we get that cool climate, but Australia, no, that's Uluru. You know, that's Queensland.
They're quite a sophisticated market in Asia, though. They do their homework, and I remember meeting a lady at one of Wine Australia's initiatives called Savour. I met a lady who was doing one of the largest wine schools in the world, and it's based in Shanghai. Mm-hmm. And so their training programs are huge, and they too are putting a lot of energy and resources into learning about not just Australian markets, but world wine markets. And so I guess the two combined are putting a lot of energy and resources into training each other and learning about what works well in each region. But they're coming along a lot faster than a lot of people realise, and they're pretty sharp. They know what they're doing.
Well, that's good. I mean, particularly, I really do think that the Australian First Families of Wine is a fantastic initiative, and obviously something that everyone should get involved with. I'm sure they've got lots of fun activities coming up, both in Australia and overseas this year. But obviously, it must be fun to go out on the road with those guys.
It's so much fun. We have a great time.
Cool. Alrighty. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Richard. What's the best way that people can connect with Burch Family Wines and Howard Park and Marshall and Burch and all of the different brands?
Yeah, probably the first point of contact would be our website, which is birchfamilywines.com.au. But we're also pretty active on Twitter. We've got a Twitter profile called Burch Wines, as well as Howard Park Wines, another handle. And a third one we have is Madfish Wines. And if neither of those suit you, we can always do Facebook as well. We've got a Facebook group called A Glass of Wine Solves Everything. Yep. Which we've gotten into a lot of trouble naming it that, but it's a great little page, and we populate with all sorts of interesting information. Not always about wine as well, which is important. So that's good. Drop us a line sometime. And people can find the wines out in the market? They can. The wines are available in all key areas of Australia. It's not too hard to find them, which is good. Fantastic. And covering quite a few price points, which is always fantastic. Exactly. You've got to cover a few price points and make the wines accessible for all people. Fantastic. Well, guys, particularly whilst we're still in summer down here in the Southern Hemisphere, jump on top of some of their Rieslings. They are some of the best you can get in Australia. But thank you again for joining us today. Thanks very much, James. As always, guys, please do follow me on Twitter at IntrepidWino, or you can follow the podcast at the Vincast. Come and visit the blog where you can read some of my past adventures and also get access to all of the episodes we've done so far at intrepidwino.com. And please do subscribe on iTunes. You can download the episodes as they go up. And if you can find the time, please do rate and comment. That would be fantastic. But until next time, bye.